So welcome to this evening's Essence for Agility Meetup. I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome actually to those of you who are new to the meetup. There's been quite a few people have joined to come and hear the topic this evening. So welcome. This is a community aimed at people that are interested in exploring Essence, which is a standard to describe all practices and methods and helps us better pick the right set of practices to suit our context. And that's very much the topic of today. And there's no point in meetups like this without participants like yourself. So please do get involved, use the chat function, and we'll have time for questions at the end. And use it as something that you can participate in, not just sit and be an audience for. So tonight, I'm delighted to welcome the authors of the Flow System Playbook and co-creators of the Flow System, Nigel Thurlow and Dr. John Turner. So we'll hear a bit later that we've been collaborating with them on creating an Essence version of the Flow System. We'll be showing you that tonight and also launching the tool Essence WorkBench for you to use yourselves. We're also joined by Ivar Jacobson, the co-creator of Essence. So I'll give the three guests a very quick introduction and get started. So Ivar, for those of you who don't know, many of you will, is nicknamed the father of software engineering, as his contributions span over 50 years, including founding use cases, component architecture, many other things. He was last year awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Agility Forum. Dr. John Turner is a researcher, a keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, co-author of the Flow System Playbook and the Flow System, and an author of numerous academic papers on team science, leadership, and other fields. He's an associate professor at the Texas A&M University and editor-in-chief of Performance Improvement Quarterly. And finally, Nigel Thurlow was the first ever chief of agile at Toyota, is currently the chief executive officer at the Flow Consortium. He's a Forbes Top 10 author, co-creator of the Flow System, and in demand as a keynote speaker and as an expert in organizational design. Have I done you gentlemen justice with that introduction?
You blew enough smoke about me, so I'm good with that.
So what we want to do today is to introduce you, if you're not familiar, to what the Flow System is, introduce you, if you're not familiar, to what Essence is, and show you using the tool Essence WorkBench how the two together are perfect partners, perfect digital partners. We were talking this the other day with Ivar and Nigel, and it is very much one of the examples of the saying that the sum is greater, the whole rather, the combination of these two things is greater than the sum of the parts. So we'll aim to show you that today. So what I'd like to do is to ask John and Nigel to give a brief introduction for those of you who are new to the Flow System to what is it? What niche does it fill?
It's a really big book. That's what it is. That weighs about 8 pounds. That's about 3 and a bit kilos. But
okay, Nigel, just a few minutes. I hope that you today will, if all of you will feel this is a very special day, you will think back on this day as the day you first heard about comprehensive framework like the Flow System being digitalized. But you heard about use cases of methods that we never have talked about before. And as Simon said, that the combination of framework like the Flow System and Essence is greater. Okay, greater than the sum. So the combination of Essence and the Flow System is greater than the sum of them. And with this, I hope we will have a fantastic hour together. So now, Nigel, please go on.
Yes, Ivan, thank you. And so just so everybody knows, I've never ever described the Flow System or as any of the people involved with it as a framework. Whilst I know that's a popular phrase, it has a lot of stigma with it as well. So the framework is not a prescription, it's not a methodology, it's an assembly of methods, and ostensibly it's a system of learning and understanding. And you will see some of that in what Simon's going to show you. He's worked really hard this week. I've spent a few hours looking over some of the stuff he's been doing to produce some real demonstrations of what these things can do when you bring the flow system and Essence together. An assembly of methods basically means that we got a bunch of methods we thought were useful, and we included them in our release of what we talk about the flow system, which is really a coming together of various different elements to combine them at their lowest or a lower level of granularity. I mean, my friend Dave Snowden, who I do give credit to for a lot of the complexity work we've done, talks about the lowest level of coherent granularity. The challenge for me was that we got this construct that John and I had worked on in the playbook, and the three of us had worked on in the earlier book on the flow system, which was to bring together very different elements, complexity thinking, distributed leadership, and team science, and to talk about how, when combined together and used together, and to repeat the phrase earlier, the sum of the parts, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So essentially, we were working to bring together areas that traditionally were isolated in their own silos. I'm still admitting people as I'm talking here. Let Simon get on with that job. And one of the things I'd thought about for a long time was that we tend to get very siloed in our thinking and be very focused on certain things. And when we start using things like frameworks, they tend to be a specific structure and a guide with specific processes and methodologies or methods to guide us to do something. And I wanted to break that mold. I wanted to move away from that completely. And I wanted to make context be the focus and not copy other people's case studies using other people's tools and methods and approaches. But I wanted to leverage the utility in all those tools, methods, and approaches and bring them together and combine them in unique and novel ways. And that's what an assembly of methods does. But then we wanted to be able to bring that to a digital audience, because it's all right having this damn great big book, which is good, by the way. It's got lots of useful stuff. But the reality is most of us work like we're working today on this type of platform. We are distributed globally in many different time zones. And I wanted a way not only to solve that problem, but also for you guys to understand better what I just rambled to say, which was, if you're exploring new opportunities, problem solving, if you're learning new methods and techniques, if you're coaching organizations, and a whole bunch of other use cases we'll get into, I wanted a way for you to be able to explore that, to learn the techniques, learn the methods, learn how you can decompose them and recombine things. And the best platform I could find was Essence to do that. So I'm deeply grateful to Ivar and to Simon. Simon's worked tirelessly. I'm giving full credit, along with my colleague and teacher, Professor John Turner, over the last year or so to bring this to reality. So I hope this is going to prove useful. And I'm going to stop talking and hand over to John to give the more professional description of what we did. Let me just mute a few. I'll mute a few people. John, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so welcome everyone. So Nigel briefly touched on the flow system. One of the characteristics is that in order to achieve a state of flow within an organization, you need to integrate the three helixes. So that's why we have the triple helix of flow. So you can't just address complexity with teams. You need leadership involved. That's just a brief example. So a lot of people address things with the team in a silo, but then when they move to the larger organization, that fails because they don't have the support from the upper leadership. So that's just an example showing how the three helixes need to be integrated to achieve flow. We have a lot of different methods in the playbook. It's more the how-to guide. The book itself, the Flow System book, is a little more in-depth, a little more on the theory, and it goes into a little more detail on what the flow triple helix of flow is. But there's more research to support the theory. Now we talk about assemblage theories. So one of the things in practice, we often find people who get fixated that they know a few good methods or techniques and they stand by those. And so when they move to a different context or a different setting, they they use what they know. And so that technique is what they're going to use. And it may not be the best technique for that new situation or that new context, but they're fixated because they're applying what they know. And so we're trying to kind of break that pattern of fixation and offer more methods, more techniques available to the practitioners and the trainers. And that's kind of what we have in the flow book. So there's a large number of methods. So each method is designed for a specific problem, a specific context or situation. Once you get out of that boundary that it's designed in, it may not work very well. So there are other techniques to select from. And that's the assemblage that we pull the methods that are applicable to the problem and context that you're dealing with to move forward to the next stage in the problem solution process. And that's where the Essence is really a powerful tool, because you can pull it, it's all there electronic, and it's more powerful than the handbook itself because it's right there digital, and you can slide and find what's relevant for you, use it, and go to the next step, pull what's relevant for you, and then keep moving forward until you resolve the problem. So that's one of the big advantages of the Essence and the flow system.
And that's what we're going to try to show you later on. So that's a really good introduction. Thank you, John. I'm aware that for some of you, Essence is a new concept as well. So I'll give you the very short description of Essence, and Ivar, if you want to jump in, then feel free. So I'll just share the screen just so you can see what Essence is as well, and I'll be showing you some of the flow system stuff with Essence as we go through, for Rail. So Essence is a standard. It's an OMG standard, and it describes it's a way of describing methods and practices, and it contains two elements. There's a kernel, which is the common ground of things that always happen. So the common things that we work with, the common things that we produce, and the common things that we do. And there's also some competencies that we require when we're creating solutions or we're solving problems. And then there's a language, and the language is what we use to describe practices. And what the powerful thing with language is it doesn't just describe, a category of things. It's got things like activities, so you can describe an activity in a practice like identifying a goal or something like that. But it also has relationships between elements, and it's that semantic connection that really brings the power out of Essence. So you see not just what you're doing and the definition of it, but you see why you're doing it. Anything you wanted to add to that, Ivar?
Oh, it's fine.
So there's what the language looks like. It's got a few components. Now I'm just showing you this because we do have some graphical elements to the language, and you'll see as we go through the examples with the flow system, there's different shapes, and this tells you what they mean. I'll walk you through an example though, just in a second. So we talked about there being a number of practices in the flow system. There's about 35, and you can see some of them here. And they've got a color coding, as John said, the helix. So the red ones are the complexity thinking helix. The blue ones are the distributed leadership helix. And the green ones are the team science helix. And you'll see in the chat, Nigel's adding some extra bits and pieces. And if we look at how we've broken down one of those practices using the Essence language, we can see an example on the right-hand side here with the practice called goal identification. So it's a team science practice. It's about goals, and it's got these different elements. So let me walk you through briefly what they are. And this gives us an insight both into what the Essence language is, but also into something John touched on a second ago, which is one of the powers of this is that you can dive into a bit of a practice and get some real value. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to have read the whole book. You don't even need to have read every part of the chapter to do with that practice before you can get some value. So we can see the first part here. This is a goal that's got that little alpha sign. That means it's what Essence calls an alpha, and that's something that we work with. We advance it through states. It's something important that we work in the practice to progress. The goal description has got a little symbol like a document because it's a work product. It's something that gets produced. So we have goals and we describe them somewhere. It might be electronically in a tool. It could be on paper. It could be a post-it note. It doesn't really matter, but we have a description, and the description might have different levels of detail. Then we've got 3 activities that we go through: identifying, specifying, and committing to the goal. And this symbol with the kind of arrow is an activity symbol. So activities are things that we do, and they result in changes of state, or maintaining a state, or producing something. And again, they might be a formal event, like a meeting, or it could be just tasks that happen. And some events can be continuous, and some are discrete, time-bounded. And then this other symbol is a pattern. And we've got a number of patterns in the goal identification practice. So things that are important. There's some rules, some characteristics, some definitions, like proximal goal and distal goal. And then the other two alphas at the bottom are other things that this practice helps us with. It helps us with our team, and it helps us with a concept in the flow system called the multi-team system, which is where you have multiple teams. So that's a little breakdown of what we've been doing. And if you think about that book Nigel held up, the 700 pages or so in the Flow System Playbook, each chapter in there, broadly speaking, is a practice, and each practice is broken down using the Essence language. And what we want to talk you through now is some ways that you can use those practices for real. And this hopefully will help you understand not just the value of Essence and Essence WorkBench, which is the tool I'll show you, but also, you know, how applying Essence to something as comprehensive as the flow system is really beneficial.
Hey, Simon, if I can just pop in there a second. So a couple of things about the visuals that you're seeing on the screen at the moment is that having a standardized way to describe a multitude of practices, methods, approaches, not just the ones in the flow system, but beyond, is extremely valuable because it gives us a standard way to decompose and describe something that may be different and is useful. But I see Chintan's asked a question about, in Agile, generally a flow system is related to Kanban method, Kanban system, Kanban board. In today's webinar is related to the above context, if not what then. So the problem is that flow is a construct. It's not a methodology. Kanban method for software isn't actually true Kanban unless it's a true pull system. Kanban itself is a pull system developed by Toyota, and then Dave Anderson sort of adapted some of what Toyota had done into a method for software. Kanban is one type of flow. It's not the flow system or just the flow system. It is just one approach to describing flow in a manufacturing context. So I just wanted to cover that flow is a construct, takes on many different forms, both in psychological flow, social constructs, manufacturing constructs, and a bunch more that we'll look at. So I just wanted to cover that up before we got deeper into the stuff you're going to show, Simon. Back to you.
Okay, so we're going to talk you through at least two, hopefully three different use cases for how the flow system can be used and how Essence WorkBench supports it. Now, Essence WorkBench is a software as a service product. We'll show you it later. You'll be able to sign up to it tonight. I'm going to show you screenshots of the product for the purposes of tonight, partly because it focuses your attention on certain aspects of it. The full screen screenshots, but it means you don't get distracted by mouse movements and reloads and things like that. Also, it's one way of insulating us a little bit from the demonstration gods, but we'll see about that. So we're going to be flicking through various kind of things on the screen, and this is simulating you could use the tool. I could be showing you the tool just now. I'm not scared to show you it, but I've got better feedback when we show static screenshots. The resolution tends to be better and it's easier for you to read them as well. So Nigel will probably talk you through most of this, but this is the first use case. We have a problem that we want to establish the complexity of it. The flow system really works best when your problems are complex. In fact, one of the first tests is if it's not a complex problem, maybe the practices of the flow system aren't the right ones for you. So how do we establish the complexity of the problem, which then leads us into what is complexity and how you can use the flow system to help your team. So Nigel, do you want to talk us through the thinking of this?
Yeah, so I use this quite a lot, and it was amusing when we were thinking about these use cases and when we were developing this approach and developing our integration with Essence. I started to write a structured guide. Now, it's quite funny when you're in a complex world where it's unpredictable, unknowable most of the time, and I was writing a structured guide. But to explain, and Simon will probably go through visuals and things, but to give you the basic context of this is if we want to do problem solving as a use case, the first thing we want to do is establish the type of problem. Now, Churchman in 1967, and you can leave this slide up now, the one with the basic Cynefin, the 3 points Cynefin there. Churchman defined a typology of problems in 1967: simple, complex, complicated. A complex problem, just as an example for the people, for everybody's benefit and edification, is one where we agree on the problem, but we don't agree on a solution. A simple problem is we agree on the problem, we agree on the solution, and a wicked problem is we don't agree on either the problem nor the solution, because we can't agree on the problem, we can't possibly agree on the solution. So let's say we take 3 points Cynefin here, which is the basic Cynefin structure. There are 3 ontological states, 3 areas, if you prefer. We've got the state of order, so we're in an ordered state, and this is why the top card on the screen shows ontological states, and that's broken down into the state of order, the state of complexity, and the state of chaos, and these are known as ontological states. So the first thing we really want to start to do is to define where our problems fit. I actually do an exercise in class with clients where they have a whole bunch of different problems they want to solve. And I'll ask them, well, where do they live? And of course, Simon's put some versions there. Now, anything to do with culture and people tends to start in the complex world, because unfortunately, we as people are complex adaptive systems. And if you weren't familiar with that phrase, and I'm not going to ask Simon to do it on a slide, but he can probably do it live later, you could drag in the complex adaptive systems card from the Flow system, which would then break down and explain what a complex adaptive system was, the characteristics of a complex.
We'll see that in a second, Nigel.
Okay, good, perfect. So the things I'm looking at here is I'm saying if time to market is too slow, or we can't make change, we don't react, so our process cycle efficiency, some people may call it flow efficiency, is not where we want it to be. These tend to be more cultural related problems, behaviors, attitudes, the way silos form in organizations. But then we might look on the other side of some of these examples, and poor quality be another example of, and I can dig into that deeper if there's any questions about why poor quality may be more of a cultural thing than a process thing. But on the other side, we may find that things like slow to onboard new team members is just a process problem. It could have some elements of poor culture or some attitudes and behaviors, some attitudinal things we need to fix, but that's more likely to be in the ordered area, which is more understandable, and it may just be a poor process, or we may not have enough sufficient human resources to be able to work on that. But on the other side, we may find we've got some things that are a little bit more engaged and involved in the way our organization's designed and built, the attitudes, behaviors, politics, and all those sort of things. So we need to meet. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a second, because what we're seeing here is one of the real powers of both the Flow system and Essence, and it's a vector for conversations. And
Yeah.
the point of this is that there's a conversation, sometimes quite an in-depth conversation, about classifying your problem as complex or ordered or disordered. Now, one of the nice things with Essence is that you've got these definitions there, so you can see the card on the right describes to you what the ontological states are. If I were to click on order, it would tell me the definition of order. And the way that a lot of these interactions work is that there's moving things around. So when we have defined what state our problems are in, then you might take the problems that are in the complex state and move them across the board a little bit, understand a bit more about them. So there's a further layer of conversation and detail. And in this example, we're finding blockers, and then you might be placing those blockers on a different version of a board or a model to try to work out what to do with them.
I think just to add to that, Simon, and thank you for scooting me along there, keep me honest here and on time. But you're now looking at the full picture of Cynefin, the 5 domains of Cynefin. So we looked at the 3 ontological states. We did a rough sort into order or complexity. Now we're starting to break these problems down even more. Things that are complex will require safe to fail experiments to learn more. And this is an exercise I actually use, where the things that are more ordered but require skills and a team of people to work together would require the expertise to implement them. And what I often ask people is, you put things down in the bottom right corner, as you'll see on the diagram of Cynefin, in this ordered state of the clear domain in the ordered state. And you might start classifying some of those problems as, why don't we act on them immediately? I often describe, as you see on the screen, these are things we can act on immediately. So then the next thing I'll say to them is, okay, so why haven't we acted on them? And what we're seeing with the power of the platform that Ivar's company produces is that we've got these cards from the Flow system which have structure and discipline, and on the right hand side you see when you click on a card it gives you more information, and all those different icons are clickable to drill down even further. But also you can drag artifacts onto the canvas. So like I dragged the 3 points Cynefin on, or I dragged the full Cynefin model on there, the Cynefin framework on there. And then we started to use these post-it notes and other aspects to actually do an exercise in real time. So we've not only learned what complexity is, and we could have done that in a separate session or in this real-time session, but we've also then been able to real-time add activity and exercise to this with the Flow system to guide you to understand at this early stage, and to start to classify things and to start to actually do something for real with it. So if you, and I, you know, Ivar will throw things at the screen, I'm sure, but I described this to him earlier on, is this is a very, very advanced mural type environment, Miro type environment. It has an intelligence built in. It has all the structured Essence language, the practices that have been described in the Essence language, and the 35-ish methods we put into the Flow system as a suggestion, not as a mandatory prescription. They break down into hundreds of elements. So it's become this very rich, powerful environment that you can add more to, and you can use other methods that exist in Essence and combine them with the things we've put in there. But just as a quick use case, just to go through what Simon's put on the screen, we've gone from understanding characteristics of complexity using some of the Flow system elements. We've been able to drag in very quickly 3 points Cynefin and do a quick assessment and understanding of different ontological states and different domains. We've then been able to add in some just straightforward artifacts and actually go through an exercise and use the Cynefin framework as one of the elements in the Flow system, plus this image that we could just drop in to actually understand where these problems lie, to do an initial understanding classification of where we think these problems are. So just very quickly, we've managed to go through an exercise to lead us further than we would have done in a traditional workshop. And I was with a client yesterday and they said, our problem is we don't have visibility to all the things we're doing. And I said, but what's the real problem? Because that isn't the problem. That's, so you're seeing an effect. You don't have visibility to all the work we're doing. But what is the problems that's causing? Because is it a tool problem? Is it a behavior problem? Is it a process problem? And it's this type of working environment that allows you very rapidly to arrive at a conversation about that, Simon.
Yeah. So we mentioned about complexity. So let's do a quick look at how we can actually understand complexity. So this is a nice example because you can see on the right-hand side that what is complexity practice, which is the first section in the complexity thinking part of the book. There's quite a lot to it. You know, there's 6 activities. There's 2 of these alpha things that we work on progressing. There's lots of patterns, including those ontological states. But actually, in this example, we just want to know if people in the team understand complexity, because you can't classify your problems if you don't understand the nature of the thing you're classifying them with. So this is just to show how we can show that. So this is another canvas. It's a board, and on the board we've got some of the elements of what is complexity practice. So we've got this thing called a worldview. So this is something that a team advances, they progress, they gradually understand more about how they fit in to a complex world. So there's two states. They first become comfortable with complexity, and then they understand it. So you can't teach or understand it properly if you haven't become comfortable at least with the concepts that it exists. And you can see that there are some checklists here that you can tick, and literally on the tool you can physically tick the checklists. If you want, you can keep track of what's happening with your team. So I'll show you just briefly on the actual live version of the product. I can tick that and it'll tell me that I've progressed through to the state of being comfortable with complexity, and then I can move to the next state. And you can see this is 3 or 4. So there are other states that we could have been in, but in this example of the exercise, we want to focus on these 2. So if I go back to this one, so first we become comfortable with it, and then we understand it. And how do we understand it? Well, we go and grab some cards from the practice, and if we need more detail or more information, then maybe there's a conversation with the coach or the facilitator, or maybe there's some homework to go and read a section of the book or do some formal training or read one of John's research papers. And then you get to the point where you can say, well, I understand those characteristics of complexity, and then you can start being more confident with your allocation of your problem. And then within the flow system, maybe John would like to talk a bit about this, but there's every section, every chapter has got a workbook exercise, and some of those lend themselves really well to exercises like the ones that we've been showing you, and some are more traditional, fill in the answers, and we can put that on the board as well.
Just to mention, by the way, while if John wants to talk about that, the worksheets in the playbook, in the physical thing, they're all available free of charge online. We put them together with some backing material on one of our websites. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute. It'll be on the recording of this webinar. But a lot of the worksheets, we've adapted some of those worksheets to this environment but you could literally go to the website, pull down the worksheet and literally copy paste it into Essence and use it to facilitate conversations, use it as a template, which you could overlay post-it notes and other text boxes onto it, and with all these different practices that are there mentioned. And as you look down the right-hand side of the screen, there are some aspects of you just jumped around. You're all right, man.
Move that out of the way. I was just going to show the website.
That's fine. And so on the right-hand side, you've got things about activities, defining a problem, classifying a problem. These are things that if you're brand new to complexity thinking, will help you learn. This becomes a training tool, a learning tool. It then transitions to a coaching environment where a skilled facilitator or coach who's familiar with these concepts can help others to become more capable around them. And then as you get into these exercises, you start to be able to combine these elements from the flow system, other artifacts, other methods, and actually start to explore your different use cases, be that new opportunities, innovation, problem solving, cultural issues, behavior issues, whatever they may be within the organization. And you may not start in complexity. You may jump into team science. You may have a collaboration issue, and Simon will get there eventually. John, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly. So the playbook is an introductory to over 38 different methods or techniques. So if you're not familiar with active listening or goal identification, then it's a good introductory for you to understand it. And then each method or technique has its own worksheet, which is to help people get started applying that technique in their place of work. So you got to remember it's very introductory to help you get started. So it doesn't go into a lot of specific heavy detail research. It's more to introduce people to 38 plus different methods and techniques. And so the worksheets are QR code, they're available online. Like Nigel said, you can download them free. So if, for example, if I were to bring the playbook to a lot of researchers at the university and they looked at social network analysis, they would say, well, that's very basic. That I already know social network analysis. But if they were to look at active listening, they may not be familiar with that. So they would need to kind of introductory method on what it is and how to get started applying it, active listening techniques. So it's introductory.
Those references are in the tool as well. So here's the what is complexity practice, and in the resources section you can see some of the further detail that is summarized in the playbook. So it's not like a lot of Essence practices, they're not intended on their own to be sufficient to teach you the practice. Once you understand it, they're help you advance your knowledge and refine it and continuously improve, but there's often further reading for the detail.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that the amount of stuff that has been packed into this Essence implementation of the flow system is incredible. The fact that you can learn all these practices, you can combine them, and we'll see some examples of that shortly. But also, if you want to go do further research, all the references are there. Some of them are clickable. They'll get you to papers, to other research, to other recommended reading. If you really want to develop a deep expertise in one or more of these areas, of course, you can read the first book, which goes much deeper into the theories and to the practices in there. But as John says, we're not trying to take one book and make you experts in everything we've described. What we're doing are introducing a number of things we think are extremely powerful and useful when used in combination. But I think Essence is going to help you learn these things much more easily by hands-on activity. And then once you've got some familiarity with the concepts and the techniques, be able to bring those and combine them together to solve some of your challenges within organizations, and then bring other assets in, as we've been showing just very briefly. Simon.
Yeah, so to finish off this little section, we've understood our problem better, and you heard Nigel and in fact John mention some of the different other practices that you might want to get involved. So the last part of the exercise is, well, which practices will help you? And you can see here the model of the flow system with all those 35 different practices, all represented by a hexagon. And what the tool lets you do is to look at those, browse them, and then you grab the ones that you want. In this case, we've got what is complexity, storytelling and narratives, complex adaptive systems, weak signal detection, active listening, teamwork training, and situational awareness. And they feel like the right set of practices, some from each of the 3 helixes. And then you select them, you click this little button, which then builds you what teams in WorkBench we call a team room, which is a room that has those practices in it and not the others. So you don't need to be cluttering your workspace with all the other practices that you're not focusing on today. Come tomorrow, you might be addressing a different problem, and the right mix of flow system practices for that problem might be a slightly different combination from the 3 helixes. So you're able to use the tool to show you what practices am I relying on for my current situation. So let's think about a second use case, unless there's any questions that we want to come back.
There's a whole bunch in the chat. I'm trying to keep up. There's some tangents as well, but don't worry about those.
Somebody
I'll
asked
deal with those.
if this is a replacement or an alternative to the Flow System Playbook. I'd say it's an accompaniment to it. Like we said before, combining the two together gives you a much richer set. The playbook has got an extra level of detail. A lot of the wording and the cards I'm showing you is directly from the playbook. That's why we wanted to collaborate so strongly on it. But there's more words in the playbook than there are on the cards. And then there's more words in the references.
I would say also the Essence, there's a lot more linkages across the different methods and techniques in Essence than we could have included in the playbook. So there's a lot of, one technique can lead to another method, and there are similarities and differences to help you get from one step to the other. You have that in Essence, whereas in the playbook, you just have one method, and then the next chapter is the next method. We try to make it interactive to where you combining methods from each of the 3 helixes to meet the triple helix flow that we talked about, but it's more usable and interactive in the Essence format.
And the notion of having state and checklist, and you're making progress. Each practice is there for a reason. It's there to help you achieve something, to stay in a given state or to move to another state. And Essence makes that really quite obvious. And each of those checklists I showed you, a lot of them are quite hard to answer. They're not some of them are simple, but a lot of them are challenging. So this is back to this notion of it really helping you think and to drive conversations among yourselves, your team, your stakeholders. Speaking of which, there's a really strong coaching use case around both the flow system and especially the Essence implementation of it, partly because what we've done in Essence is break out in the flow system all the aspects into separate elements, separate cards, and you could print them as physical cards. So here's 2 quick examples of how we can use one set of cards, which are the biases cards, in 2 different ways. So as a coach, for example, I do find these really useful. So we've got on the right-hand side, the description. Because of the time, I'll not go into a lot of the detail, but we all aware there are biases. There are different types of bias: source, cognitive, and decision-making. And each of those has got many biases, of which some have been described in the flow system. So from a coaching perspective, for any given situation I'm in, I want to know whether those biases might affect me. So we can play some really simple games where we take these cards and as a team we run an exercise where we say, well, how relevant are they? How likely are they to be present in my team setting, and then I can do something about them, because there's quite a lot of them. I think there's 28. So you've got a lot to keep in your head. So focus on the ones that are most likely to happen. Of course, talking about biases like this will help turn unconscious biases into conscious biases, because you're starting to become more aware of them. And this kind of process of putting them on, I think Nigel talks about this as a dyad, where you've got this scale that you're moving things along, helps you focus on what they're all about. And then, of course, you choose the ones that are most likely to happen, and you focus on them. Second game is where you would say, well, I do want to focus on all 28, but that's a lot for me to focus on. So why not spread them out across the team? Just shuffle them out. And then as we go through our team day-to-day activities, each person has 2 or 3 different biases that they're charged with keeping an eye out for. And that's another way of bringing biases consciously into the way teams work, rather than being things that affect our decision-making and affect our performance, but do so at an unconscious level. So this is an example of taking a set of things from the playbook and bringing the coaching aspects out.
I just want to address something, Simon, because Krishna is asking in the chat about, is this mainly a tool for experienced flow system practitioners? I hope not. I hope it's a tool that anybody can start by exploring. I mean, yeah, read the book, look at the free material online. That's going to help you get an understanding of what John and I sat down to write in the playbook, and what the 3 of us wrote in the original book. Predominantly John wrote the first book anyway, because he's the real clever guy here. And then from that, the Essence implementation helps you explore aspects of this. I mean, let me give you a very simple example, and we may or may not get onto it. I mentioned collaboration earlier. Let's just say there is a feeling that the team just isn't collaborating very well. Here we go. So we've got a problem here. A large, I thought it was a case study in there, but a large multinational high-tech org. We're organizing silos and identified that team collaboration across the silos is poor and is affecting our performance. Now, this is a case study or a use case that probably everybody in this room and everybody watching a subsequent recording will have an experience in anything other than just a small family-owned company. You're going to get organic growth, which is called huge silos, and cross-organizational collaboration is poor. Even in the vertical silo, you may find cross-team collaboration is poor. Let's say using scaled agile framework, you've got a bunch of release trains, a bunch of value streams defined, and you've got 500 people all involved in this, and collaboration is a mess, because you can't ship to production every 2 weeks, and even at the end of your program increment, you may be 50% of your features unusable or unshippable or unfinished. So we have a problem. So let's go and understand what collaboration is, Simon.
So what is collaboration? So again, we're looking at one of the, a section of the practice. So there's other things in the collaboration practice. You can see here that there's about team contracts and all sorts of things, but at the core of it, there's some tips for effective collaboration. And actually there's an assessment as well. But even without the assessment, you can look at these 8 aspects of effective collaboration: sharing of knowledge, access to resources, active listening, etc. And first of all, you want to know, actually, do I even understand what that means? What is active listening? If we don't understand that, how can we tell if it's happening, and how can we improve? So there's a nice little axis here of we don't understand it well, or we do. And that's an interesting conversation. And then you've got the second axis, which is whether you do it frequently or infrequently. And again, even at the top right, where we think we understand it well and we think we do it frequently, well, that might not be true. And there's a test that you should be doing there. But definitely things down at the right and the left and the bottom, this particular example, shared goals, is something that they don't have. They're in silos. They've got common independent goals, but they don't really care about each other's goals, and they don't necessarily know how their individual or proximal goal is related to the wider organization. So that's an area that you might want to think about focusing on. And if you want to get more in depth, there's actually a whole assessment of 26 questions. And each of those questions, you can see in the right how the scoring works. And I mean, you could put this into a different tool as well, but this is a nice, easy way to do it. You line up the questions on the left, you drag them onto whichever score you think. When you click on the card, you can see what the question is on the right. You can see roughly kind of where you're going, and you end up with a bunch of cards. Now, one of the nice features is that you can display an element in the tool as a card, or if you prefer, you can express it as a token, so you can count them more easily. And if you want to give yourself a score, you can, although you shouldn't probably focus too much on the score. But you certainly can see, here's 4 questions here on the left that I really want to think about problems. And then, of course, you can now do something about it. So the result of this exercise, and to come back to, is it Krishna's question, you don't need to know anything about the flow system to be able to read a card with a description of what a shared goal is, what effective collaboration is. You can read that card, and just even with intuitive understanding of it, without worrying about the theory, you can still get value from thinking about these aspects of collaboration and how well or otherwise your team does it. And the questions are really simple. Leadership is always responsive to your requests. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. You don't need to, anybody could pick up these cards and get a good view of their readiness for collaboration without having any prior knowledge. And then, of course, once you've got these areas to focus on, what you're going to do, you're going to then find out something more. So in this case, the goals is a good one. So we can then pull in the goal identification practice. Let's look at it and see what it means to be setting good goals. And there's some characteristics. There's the 5 C's of goal setting. So again, we could take those 5 C's, commitment, clarity, check-in, challenge, etc., and say, well, how well do we think we do that? Is that likely to be something that's in the goals that we set, or is it not likely to be in the goals that we set? And we're again talking about goals. And then another aspect of the tool is that, of course, a goal is an instance of you have several goals. So you can actually model that in the tool. So we can have a particular goal that goes through these states, and then we can tick for each individual goal where you are. So this example, the teams were working, they have existing work underway, so they're already in the state of where their goal is committed to. But what about the previous states? Would they have ticked all the check boxes leading up to commitment? And the answer is, in this case, no. And anytime you've not ticked a state in one of these instances is a risk. So in this case, this one here, the understanding the relevance of the goal they didn't feel confident with. So there's something to think about. And then you can look at the difference between different teams' assessment of how their goals are being scored. So whether whether you tick the boxes is less important than having the conversation about what that checklist actually means.
I think just to jump in a second, Sam, because I know if you're not on mute, just if you are can just make sure you're muted unless you're contributing just for the background noise. It keeps breaking through occasionally. And I know that my friend Philippe over in the UK and others, are asking about, can we show step to step in the team rooms and things. I just want to give sort of an overview of what we've created here. So if you wanted to do something, as we've just shown, like collaboration, and you're not really sure, I mean, we'll talk about collaboration, go ask somebody to define it, give you a couple of sentences to define what they mean by collaboration. They'll probably come up short. And so there's a lot of research in the literature, in the peer-reviewed material that John spent a career doing this. He's a professor of team science, amongst other things. And so he's studied the research extensively, contributed to that research. And from that, we put a lot of that content into the flow system and in the books we've written to describe it. And then that's now been transferred into this digital platform. So if you're having problems with collaboration, you can understand what effective collaboration is. But let's assume you're doing this. You start off with a problem definition. You've started off with coming to this facilitated session. You've gone, we've got a problem with collaboration. So the first thing you might do is explore that a little bit, explore what type of problem it is, and maybe use Cynefin and other things of that nature. You may then decide to launch into ethnographic sort of research. You may want to do something called, and I'm conscious Tom says don't use big fancy words or lots of words, but the reality is you may find that you've started talking about collaboration, but now we need to do some sense making. Now, you may have no idea what sense making it is, but it's narrative capture from the environment. So you better understand your environment, your people, your culture. And it's a way of capturing their contributions through narrative and storytelling and anecdotes. There's various different tools that can be used. So you get a better understanding of your environment, your culture. And then that starts to help you understand and see patterns, dark constraints, other things that may be affecting collaboration. So while this is a simple way to understand what effective collaboration looks like, you may not actually understand why you can't do it effectively. So this would lead you to say, well, and through the symbols down the right-hand side, there will be links to other alphas, alphas being this sort of, high level categorization of a practice. And it would probably say, okay, well, we want to go into and we want to go and learn something about the environment we're in, the culture in. We think the collaboration issue is due to culture. So we start to dig into that and go, okay, well, we need to do some ethnographic research. So let's look at sense making, what that actually means, and then go start to understand how to use sense making, go do some of that narrative capture, those anecdote circles, these other techniques, bring that back to the session that's been saved and say, okay, now we've got more information. That might lead us in many different directions. When you get into team science, you've got the aspects of team learning, team cognitions, team construction. There's organizational design elements in distributed leadership. So you may need to look at your org design. Everybody talks about value streams today. Do you even know if you're running a value stream correctly? You take a definition from Scaled Agile and you go run with that, and then you find, well, that isn't working. So there's a problem with the org design. And so the idea of this is you can explore multiple different challenges, opportunities, problems. You can use it to teach, you can use it to learn, you can use it to coach, you can use it into day-to-day. You can set up boards which allow you to do day-to-day coaching. You can add gamification in if that's going to help, and Simon's shown some very basic ideas around that. Even putting the Cynefin image on the board is a gamification. It's a way to get people to interact and participate. It's multi-user environment. And then as you get into some of these levels and you want to know more about them, we're sort of talking about goals here, and we'll get into talking about goals. And you might say, well, we're not achieving our goals when there's more than one team. So that's multi-team systems and goals in multi-team systems. And I'm not going to ask Simon to click on it now, but in the bottom right of the visual is sharing, you'll see there's a multi-team systems out for that whale shape, that shape of a whale. You could click on that, and that would then take you into a deep dive about multi-team systems, understanding what multi-team systems are, how they work, the unique characteristics of that versus a single team system. So you get a better understanding of how to design multi-team systems. Then you can go back to goal identification, and you start to then you start to understand, well, how do we do goals in a multi-team system? And I'll throw some words at you. We've got proximal goals and distal goals. Scrum people will talk about product goals and sprint goals. Okay, so now we're starting to understand. So now we go back to the goal aspects of and I know Simon's got a small use case set up on that. So we start to understand the definitions of different types of goals and how they differ between a single team and a multi-team system. Multi-team just being two or more teams. And then we start to understand what are the aspects of goals, how we set those goals. And that then is also linked to collaboration, because if we don't have clear goals and we don't understand how the work we do links to a bigger picture, that starts to impact collaboration. So there's so many different ways to work with this, and I'm sorry if this is a bit overwhelming for people, but that's the power of what's been created. Simon, I'm going to hand back to you so you can sort of look at that goal case study before I drive everybody bonkers. You're on mute, or I can't hear you, one or the other.
Yes, so we've kind of reached the end of that use case where we'd identified that goals were something we wanted to work on, and there's a whole practice that helps us with goals. Similarly, we could easily have jumped into multi-team systems and when you start thinking about proximal and distal goals and so on. And as you saw there, you can add practices in and you can take them away and start new team rooms and so on. I just want to try and wrap things up a little bit, and we'll move into the questions. I know that some people only have the hour, but there was a question about what other practices are there beyond the flow system, and there are many. So this picture here, which is where with one of the links, you'll start off on this page, and this gives a kind of picture version of what we've got. So you can see there's some general kind of agile things. There's Team Kanban from Kanban University, a set of agile at scale and agile essential practices, things like agile teaming, agile estimation, agile retrospectives, and so on. There's some agnostic practices. There's story mapping from Jeff Patton. There's some health checks that IGI have done. There's the whole essentially unified process. We've got Scrum at Scale, the Spotify stuff from Joachim, Ken Pugh's acceptance test-driven development, behavior-driven development, Alistair Coburn's hexagonal architecture, and then the flow system ones here. And the way that the tool works is you can browse those practices, drag them in, and create yourself a team room with the combination of practices that you want. And the other place you find those is in this Explore Practices, where you can see them all, and then you can see a summary of the practice. If I click on it, for example, there's collaboration on the right-hand side, you can see what it's made up of. So there's a whole range of practices, and especially when you move out of the complex space, a lot of those other practices become really, really helpful. I just want to, just as we're on the time, I want to quickly tell you about how you can get access to this tool yourself. It's a tool that we've been using internally, but we're keen for it to be available for personal use for everybody. And we can go to a new website we've got set up called Essify, essify.com. There's a sign up links there. You can go to the Flow System practice page, and you've got a Flow System starter. So that will, if you click on the Get Started from the Flow System page, you'll start with this board, which has all the foundations of the flow system. So if you're not familiar with all the detail, then you can read about it there, click on the cards, and then you've got all the flow system practices. And again, you drag the hexagons into the box, draw around them, drag a red box around them, and start your team room. The main page link takes you to this page. And what's the tool about? Well, it's about harnessing the power of Essence practices to develop your team and make your team and your workforce more effective. That's either by getting better at the practices you already use, because mostly we're not as good as we think we are at the practices we already have, or it's about finding the right mix of practices for your situation, maybe bringing in bits from other areas that you hadn't really thought of, like Scrum at Scale or Kanban or the flow system, or maybe it's about tweaking and customizing so you can create your own practice elements and your own practices within your team room as well. So that's how you get to it with us at essify.com. But what I probably want to do now is open to questions, because I'm aware there's been a lot of activity in the chat. And I'll stop the share. I can always start it again if we want to show an example of something. But does anybody like to unmute and ask a question? Or John or Ivar, is there anything you wanted to jump in with? Appreciate it, Nigel.
Yeah, real quickly touch on one thing. So one of the unique things about the flow system and the way it's put together is that we look at all levels. We call that levels of analysis. And so an example is distributed leadership is distributed across the whole organization. So we look at leadership at the individual level, at the team level, at the multi-team system level, and the executive level of organization. So we address the whole level, the whole organization. And the two examples that we just saw, the collaboration readiness, that's really an organization. Do they provide the resources for teams and individuals to collaborate? And that's kind of what the readiness. So that's more the organizational level or department level, right? And then the effective collaboration. So if you're looking at teams, this is what these are examples of what effective collaboration looks like. And that's what the cards you looked at. And that could be viewed at more at the team level, effective collaboration for teams. So we have the different levels built into the flow system because we look at all the levels of analysis within the organization.
I'm sorry, I'm just keeping up with the chat messages. There's a whole bunch of them in there. And somebody was asking, just for the benefit of the tape when people watch this back, if you are a practice creator and you want to put your practices into Essence, you can go through the Ivar Jacobson website, IJI International, or go through the Essify, and it'll give you links to other contacts. And you can collaborate to add practices to Essence. and using the structured language, the essence, I mean, Ivar calls it the essence kernel, but the structured language with the whale pictures, the alphas, and all the other things that Simon showed at the beginning, enables you to describe your practices in a common visual language. And then as people get familiar with the tool and they see these icons, they know if they click on this particular icon, it's an activity. If they click on another icon, it's more information. And then, as you say, you've got, as you saw in some of the demonstration, we never have enough time to go into this in depth. As you bring up one thing like team learning or team cognitions, it will show you related elements and practices to the one you're investigating. So if you're doing collaboration, it will link to things like team learning. And when you get into team learning, it will link to other things. So it helps you to start to learn, but then build a picture and bring things together. And if you're using practices from Scrum at Scale or Kanban University or whoever it is that's in there, then you will have aspects where you're building up a set of capability for your context, and you go, yeah, we really need to learn about problem definition. So you can go to the Flow system and pull in problem definition, combine it with work you're doing in the Kanban space or Scrum space, and then start to understand much more about that. I mean, Scrum's great. Tells you to use teams, doesn't tell you how to make a team or create a team or coach a team. The Flow system does. But the Flow system, whilst it's got Scrum built into it, the thing that I developed with Toyota, Scrum the Toyota way, you may not want to use that. You may be Scrum at Scale practitioners, but you need to learn more about goals in multi-team systems. The Flow system will give you that. So it starts to build you this canvas of learning and becoming more expert and coaching, but also now you want to solve problems. We've got a problem. We need to explore this. So you bring things into this environment to help you uncover and solve problems and find experiments you can go and do to try and mitigate those problems. This is the same way you can explore new innovations, new opportunities, etc. It's so incredibly rich, but that's why a lot of people have been failing out in the market, because the environments are either not capable of harnessing that wealth of information effectively, or they have gaps. They just don't cover the things they need to do, like Scrum not teaching you how to be a team.
So let me add that one of the things we have for many years tried to do is to develop support for not just developing content or providing content. I mean, many of the methods out there, they have a lot of content, whatever you call it, method, process, and so on. They have a lot of content, and they are very good on content. But how do you present it so people adopt it, they adapt it, they update it for years to come? Sustainability. That is one of the use cases of Essence and Essence WorkBench. There are others, for instance, making practices active thanks to game playing, serious game playing. So we have for a long time wanting to present something like this, where you can get access to it and play around with it and get hopefully value of this free version. Yeah, I don't know, Simon, how you're going to get how people can sign up for it.
Yeah, so you can sign up through the website. There's two paths. If you go through the Flow System practices link, you'll start off with that Flow System picture. If you sign up on the main page, then you'll get the picture with all the other practices. You can always get to the Flow System practices as well. And there's a bunch of explainer videos on the website that'll help you navigate the product. You've seen, and Nigel's explained, there's quite a lot to it. We've tried to make it as simple as we can, but there's a lot going on. So there's some help there. And there's a feedback function within the tool as well. So if you've got any questions or suggestions, then please use that. That goes straight to the team. And it's a project that we're, as I say, actively developing. We intend it always to be free for personal use for typically limited number of things, so you can use it and get all the value from it. But when you want to get into having lots of things, lots of team rooms, lots of boards, lots of members, more advanced authoring and things like that, then there'll be a variety of payment tiers that will release shortly. And there's enterprise versions that come with a lot more support and a lot more helping you get the best of it. There's more templates and things that we can provide. So there's lots you can do with it. Watch the videos, have a play, and use it to understand Essence a little bit more as well. There's templates that you can upload and see all the things I showed you. There are templates that you can upload into a board and see for yourself. There's templates that give you an overview of Essence, and the limit really is your imagination.
You know, I just want to say, and really it is a gracious thanks to Ivar on this, because I really insisted there was free access to this. When we wrote the Flow system, we wrote the Flow guide originally. It's all free online, still exists to this day in 22, 23 languages now, and more being translated. When we wrote the first book, we gave it away free on the university website. It was a pain in the ass to read it on the university website, but it was free. Because I recognize there's a lot of parts of the world which can't get access to this stuff. When we wrote the playbook, we put all the worksheets and supporting material on the website for free, and there's been tens of thousands of downloads of that. I wanted access to this way of thinking, this way of learning, this way of approaching things free of charge to everybody. But at the same time, Ivar has a company, he has a business. I mean, this stuff there's been over a year of work on this. There's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars gone into developing this, notwithstanding the years of work John, myself, and others have put into doing this. So there has to be a way for people to get paid, which is fair enough. But I did push, and Ivar gave in, I think, or just said yes really easily, to giving away this personal tier for free. So I'm really gracious for that. But I think it's important that for people to be able to learn and develop themselves, especially in parts of the world where they don't have US type money to buy these things, this is now available. But over time, for organizations, for large companies, it's incredibly powerful. And I'm really grateful this has happened. Ivar, you were going to say something. I'm sorry. No, you're just going to smile.
And actually, what you said is also true for lots of the other practice authors. So
yeah, agreed.
Scrum, Kanban, Jeff Patton stuff, you know, it's about getting their ideas out to as many people as possible and making it as easy as possible for people to get real value from their practices. So it's always something that in the past, we've offered practices as downloadable cards, which we still have. And actually we haven't made them publishable yet, but I did put a lot of time into creating card packs with the Flow system practices, including packs like, for example, a set of bias cards, because that's a useful thing to collect together. So there's lots of different form factors, but we think now the digital platform through Essence WorkBench is going to be the kind of predominant way for people to access the practices, understand them, use them, and see the value that they can bring into their teams through understanding them better.
You know, when you mentioned Jeff's work, you know, because I use Jeff Patton's work all the time in my professional work, just being able to pull his work in. Maybe we're doing a story map, an empathy map or something, and then we start to look at breaking down work, and then we go, okay, I want to drag in, I need to know more about this thing. So let's drag in some practices either from Scrum at Scale, Kanban, or some of the things from the Flow system. You start to build these incredibly rich maps that really educate the people doing the work or exploring a problem or trying to find a better way. It's just an incredibly rich environment. And there's nothing out there at the moment in the digital domain that does this at this level. And it's the clickability, it's the clickable assets in there that when you pull in a card, it's intelligent. You click on things, it gives you more depth and breadth. I honestly just go sign up and explore it. If you don't like it, it's no good to you, don't use it, but at least go play with it and explore it and try it. Because if I mentioned earlier in the chat, it's free.
And since you mentioned Jeff Patton and story mapping, we also have to mention that you can also get an upgraded version of use cases that integrates very well with user stories, my cone, and others, and story mapping, and there are many others similar or practice in that space for business analysts.
And more coming. And the use case 3.0 will be in there soon. Somebody mentioned security practices. We're working with Paul McMahon on some security practices. There's some architecture stuff. And we've done stuff for clients as well, with their own internal practices, where either some of them are customizations, their version of Scrum, say, or things that are completely new. So there's a lot of scope to take a custom way of doing some aspect of your work, couple it with, the mainstream Scrums and Kanbans and parts of the flow system to make something that's really rich and unique and the right fit for you.
If you're working in organizational design, organizational change management, organizational development, this is the type of environment and tooling you need. And all these people who are in Agile and Scrum and Kanban worlds, you are in change management. That's basically what you're in there doing. I mean, that's exactly what it is. So, and as the sort of the adoption curve for the Agile training world sort of starts to fall off a cliff, this is where you as practitioners now need to be spending time studying, learning, becoming broader and deeper in the things as Dave Snowden says, these expert generalists. You need to get in this, because if you're working in org design and advising organizations, you need more than Scrum and Kanban to your portfolio, and this environment will give you access to that, really skill you, really teach you, and then enable you to use it as a powerful tool to facilitate deep conversations in many different use cases within organizations that we all continue to work in. So I really do. I mean, it's free.
Are there any questions? Would anybody like to unmute and ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, I would, actually. Thank you. So first, I want to thank you for the presentations. It was a combination of, I think, impressive and, if not a little overwhelming. And from my perspective, I can see the problem it's solving. All right. So I think this is immensely powerful. The thing that strikes me is that with the breadth of knowledge that's baked into this, the depth of knowledge that's baked into this, and just a few of the sort of scenarios that you gave us some useful use cases, if you like. It strikes me that being able to facilitate using this tool is non-trivial. All right. So Nigel, you said that, just get into it. But is there anything that you could say that might help people that really wants to get the most out of this? Because this is not a trivial pursuit, I would imagine.
No, you're right, and it does require some level of effort, not to use the tool per se, but to understand all the content of the tool and how you deploy it, because there are topics in there people will be clueless on. I mean, people who are deep experts in complexity may know absolutely nothing about team science and vice versa. And people like me with a deep lean background, some people may not have that depth and breadth of knowledge. So some of that is going to require the individual practitioner. I went all blurry for some reason. I don't know why I'm all blurry. I apologize for that. But it's not important. So, but it will require the practitioner to spend some time and effort studying some things. And, that's why we write books and we put things online, because you can go study the material, find them, and then go, I know of a tool where I can go and use that now in anger. And you can go to that tool, Essence WorkBench, pull in these things and start using it. But even at the simple level, let's just say you sign up for an account with Essence WorkBench today. The first thing you should do is just have a look around and say, that thing there interests me, whatever that might be. Maybe it's psychological safety, work that's been made famous by Dr. Amy Edmondson. So just grab the card that says psych safety, create a room for it, and just click on the elements and explore it. And then see what else you can bring in that would be relevant to that, like leader's intent, derived from commander's intent, the work from Dave Marquet and others, which can say to, okay, so we want to give intent, but we need psychological safety. So I've got this little tiny room now that brings those two things together. I can understand them in more detail. Now I can facilitate a session in the tool with a team or a group of stakeholders and talk about these things and talk about intent-based leadership and establishing psychologically safe environments. And then if we have then it might reveal we have a cultural problem. So then we can start to pull in aspects to do with culture and start to look at narratives, actually storytelling within the organization. So it's like from one small acorn, great oak trees grow. But, just drag in, too many English metaphors, but drag in one card that makes some sense to you and explore from that point out. And I'll try and fix my blurriness while Simon takes over.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where I was going to come in as well, is that you can't just start with a part of a practice. So one example is, say, for example, Scrum. If you might not know a great deal about Scrum, but if you open the Scrum practice and you say, well, let's just pick sprint planning. Well, what's that about? What does it achieve? How is it connected to the sprint goal? How is it connected to the product owner and the Scrum Master? And you can see through the relationships in the practice what's connected to what, and you can start to understand it better. One nice exercise actually is to start with a blank page, drag on, for example, say the product owner, and say, let's draw a rich picture with what the product owner's responsibilities are with Scrum. What do they do with different activities? What's important? What are they responsible for? And just draw a picture. And that any practice starting at any point and just working your way out can be really nice.
I'll give you.
Sorry.
Finish off, Simon.
One last thing on psychological safety. The first state in psychological safety is that you on the same page, really. I can't remember what the state is named, but that's got a set of checklists. Have we got the same purpose? So you can start with that one card and say, well, I don't need to be an expert in psychological safety, but I can answer 5 questions. Have we got the same shared purpose? Well, let's ask the team. If they all write something completely different down, that's somewhere to start. I might not have got past that first checklist before I've got some work to do with my team that will help us become more psychologically safe. I don't necessarily need to have become an expert prior to running that exercise. Every practice, not every practice, most practices, and it will become all of them at some point, has, when you load it into your team room, it comes with an overview that just gives you a little walkthrough of the practice as a rich picture. So that's a good place to start as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add something just for fun. If you want something controversial to start with, go look at Scrum the Toyota Way that's built into the Flow system. Go look at the definition of ready and pull the definition of ready onto the map, and you'll have some lively conversations with anybody who knows Scrum about the DOR. So, as John also put in the chat, begin with something familiar. Something, just one card, drop it in, and trust me, you'll quickly explore from there. When Dave West who's the CEO of Scrum.org, wrote a foreword for the Flow System Playbook, he pinged me and he said, I've just lost 2 hours of my life just following references in one section. And you'll have fun doing that with Essence, because what you'll do is you'll pull in a card and it'll take you in a multitude of different directions, and you'll get excited and lost in exploration and suddenly realize you're learning a bunch of stuff. And then the ideas will come to you. The use cases will come to you. The use cases, even though Ivar invented the phrase, we haven't even thought of most of the use cases yet. I've used it for things that I will use it for, but you guys will think of a multitude of ways. Start with something that's familiar or something you're interested in and see where it takes you. If nothing else, you'll learn something. It might be useful just for that. And it's free.
Yeah. When Simon and I codified the Flow system into Essence over the past summer, there was a lot of methods that he was familiar with, or thought he was familiar with. And then once we got into more details on what that method was, it was like, I really didn't know this method. So start with something familiar, go through it, and you, more than likely, hopefully you'll learn something about that method that you don't know, and then branch off from there.
Richard.
Like Ian, I'm feeling very overwhelmed, but it does sound like something. You've an enormous amount of work's gone into this. But I've got 2 questions. One is, when Simon was demonstrating it, there was, I think it was around collaboration or whatever, there was sort of questionnaire about checklists for people to tick off individual members of the team to sort of tick off in terms of whether they agree, strongly disagree, etc., etc. And then those cards got sort of positioned on a grid. Is that done sort of automatically in the system? I mean, or how does that work? I mean, does it? I mean, you share those, you share the system out to people. Each person completes their responses, and then does that summary get generated automatically?
So no, at the moment it's a team product. So everybody in your team will be on the same board. So you can do it in a number of ways. You can either have as a team conversation, you know, where do we score this question, agree a position and put it down, or each individual person can individually score either on a separate part of the board or in their own board. We've got quite a lot of features in the pipeline around stronger facilitation tools, the ability to have the canvas understand where something is. So if I drag a board something and drop it onto a number 2, it knows that's me scoring it as 2. We can capture, you know, attributes around those patterns. So you could, you know, store this was the answer in June, here's the answer in November. But a lot of it is manual at the moment. But what you do have is the ability to have history. So you can have a new board every time, and you've got the memory of what you had before. You can refer back, look at the differences and things like that. But it's fairly manual at the moment, but we've got lots of ambition.
I mean, given what it does do, it was just sort of trying to just understand where the boundaries are.
James has asked a question in the chat as well about AI. It's well known that Ivar and the company are working on AI and AI with Essence. There is the intent, and it's hopefully my intent to see this through, is that when you choose certain things, cards from the Flow system, AI will help you navigate. It will also potentially, depending what you're doing, make suggestions or explain things or guide you. So those things will come. I mean, this is all generative AI, and the use of AI and a lot of this is still in its embryonic stage, but it's moving lightning quick, but that will come.
To use an old English bit of slang, it's sort of gobsmacking, really, the scale of what you've done, if I've understood it correctly. You know, I mean, it's yeah, no, I mean, yeah, congratulations, really.
What we've managed to achieve here, I could not have achieved any other way. And as I said earlier on, the ability to collaborate with IJI and Simon and John working together, especially, and it's been more than just it's been over a year of hard labor on this. I believe we've built the foundation of something pretty special, and it will only go from strength to strength from here.
No, I just wanted to add to the AI discussion, because we have been working with AI since the year 2000. And we actually built a product that was based on intelligent agents, a kind of expert system technique, back in 2000, and built a product called Waypointer that actually got the international award year 2004 and 5. But it was the wrong timing. It was the product worked very well, but at wrong timing. But I knew one thing, that this would come back. And so Essence has been inspired by this experience, because at that time we developed the AI support for one of the big frameworks at that time, Rational Unified Process. And since RUP died, our died, but it was not anymore one of the top thing. The product was not anymore in favor. But so Essence is a common ground for methodologies and whatever. And that was the whole idea.
Ivar, it's interesting, and you know, I'm going to pick up that phrase just as we start to wrap up, I think. But RUP died. Okay, everything goes away eventually, and something new comes along, and we're seeing that bell curve, or whatever you want to call it, that inflection point in this sort of agile world at the moment. And it's time for people to start realizing we need to focus on context, not case-based approaches. And this is the evolution, the revolution, the thing that allows us to do that. I believe the work that John and myself and others have done have led us to a great understanding, and it's been something I've wanted to do professionally for years, and John helped me to achieve that in the research that he's done, and in the clients that are now working with us and allowing us to go play in their back gardens basically and do this. And now with the collaboration with you, Ivar, and Simon and the team at IJI, have been able to develop a platform which everybody else can now start to access and start to work on solving problems from a context base rather than copy pasting solutions from a case based approach. I think this is the next inflection point. And we might be in the early adopter phase here. Simon Wardley would say the genesis phase of all this, but we will get rapidly into that, early majority, the majority phase, because this is the way that we solve problems in organizations going forward, not just grabbing a, ABC 1, 2, 3 prescription and go. I mean, all the large consultancies have been doing that, and McKinsey just fired all their agile coaches. I mean, that's not uncommon knowledge, that's public knowledge. And they're having new conversations with there's a reason this is happening. Is because there are new ways of approaching the challenges we have, and hopefully we've given you an opportunity to explore some of that. Simon, I'll leave you to bring us home.
Yes, before we get into what could be another interesting discussion. So as always, when the conversations are as rich and interesting, it's easy to lose track of time a little bit. So apologies for anybody who was desperate to get away earlier, but was so compelled by the conversation that you've stayed with us until now. So thank you all very much. It's been a really interesting conversation. There's lots of great engagement in the chat, so I hope you found it both useful and interesting. There's some help available. We're going to set up some drop-in sessions so you can get some kind of one-to-one help if you want it as well. And I would like to thank very much Nigel and John and Ivar for taking part this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are. And I'd very much like to thank you all for attending, for your questions, for your interest, and for your attention. And hopefully we'll see you again at another Essence for Agility meetup.